The evening began like many others in the Miller house, quiet on the surface but tense underneath, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, and Laura Miller felt at the moment she stepped into the kitchen, sensing that something unseen was about to break the fragile routine she had been clinging to for months. The sky outside was already dark, the streetlights glowing softly in their calm Ohio neighborhood, and inside the house the silence felt too loud, broken only by the low hum of appliances and the distant sound of a television playing in an empty living room, because David was late again, always late these days, and Laura had stopped asking why, choosing instead to focus on small tasks like chopping vegetables and stirring soup, pretending that normal life was still possible if she followed the same steps every evening. Ethan, her 16-year-old stepson, sat at the kitchen table, his backpack on the floor, his phone untouched beside him, his shoulders tense in a way that made Laura glance at him more than once, because Ethan was usually polite and calm, the kind of boy who did his homework without being asked and avoided conflict, yet tonight his jaw was tight, his eyes distant, as if he were carrying a weight far heavier than school stress. Laura tried to start a light conversation, asking about his classes, but his answers were short, almost forced, and when he finally pushed his chair back and stood up, she noticed his hands were shaking slightly, which made her heart skip with unease. He looked at her then, really looked at her, not as a child speaking to an adult but as someone who had crossed an invisible line, and his voice came out low and strained when he said, "I can't take it anymore," a simple sentence that seemed to echo in the room, stopping Laura mid-motion as she froze with the spoon hovering over the pot, her mind racing through possibilities, trouble at school, problems with friends, anger toward his father, but none of them felt big enough to explain the pain in his eyes. She slowly set the spoon down, turning toward him with care, choosing her words gently because whatever this was, it mattered, and she asked what he meant, her voice steady even though her chest felt tight. Ethan swallowed hard, pacing a few steps as if standing still hurt too much, and when he spoke again, his words came out fast, tangled with emotion, saying he was tired of pretending, tired of smiling at dinner, tired of watching things happen and acting like they didn't matter. And Laura felt a cold knot form in her stomach because his words sounded too much like the thoughts she herself had been pushing away. He stopped pacing and looked at her again, his eyes glossy but determined, and he said that keeping quiet was making him feel sick inside, that every day he felt like he was betraying her by saying nothing. And Laura's heart began to pound as she realized this was not about teenage frustration but about something far deeper. Something that involved her. She told him to sit, told him he could tell her anything, and when he finally sat back down, gripping the edge of the table, she saw fear on his face, fear not for himself but for what his truth would do to her, and that realization alone hurt more than she could explain. Ethan hesitated, then said he never wanted to hurt her, that she had always been kind to him, patient, and fair, and Laura felt a sudden sting behind her eyes, because she had tried so hard to be a good stepmother, to be a safe place in a blended family that never quite fit together perfectly. Then he said that he couldn't stand watching her trust someone who didn't deserve it, and those words landed heavily, forcing Laura to sit down across from him as her thoughts rushed back to the signs she had ignored, David's late nights, the guarded phone, the emotional distance that had slowly grown between them, and in that moment she knew, even before Ethan said anything else, that the truth he carried was connected to the quiet cracks in her marriage. The kitchen felt smaller now, the air thick, and Ethan took a deep breath as if preparing to jump, and Laura braced herself, knowing that whatever came next would change her life, even though she still didn't know exactly how, only that the fragile calm she had been holding on to was about to shatter, and that this ordinary evening, with its simple soup and silent house, was about to become the moment everything finally came into the open. Ethan didn't speak immediately after dropping the first words. He walked to the window, his back stiff, hands pressed against the glass as if searching for answers in the quiet Ohio street outside, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting on his tense face, and Laura, sitting across the table, watched him carefully, knowing this moment was delicate, knowing that the weight he carried was not just teenage worry but something deeper, something that could change their family forever. Finally, he turned, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted that he had seen David with another woman, someone from his office, and Laura felt the air leave her lungs, a strange calm and sharp pain at once, because the confirmation of her suspicions, long ignored, was now coming from her stepson, the boy she had tried to protect from adult problems, the boy whose trust and innocence mattered more to her than anything else. Ethan's words stumbled out quickly after that, explaining that he had never wanted to tell her. That he had hoped it was a mistake or that his father would come clean himself, but watching them together, seeing the small smiles and secretive glances, made it impossible to keep silent, and Laura's hands trembled slightly as she reached across to take his, grounding him, reassuring him that it was not his fault, that honesty was always the right choice even when it hurt. He spoke of nights filled with tension, of pretending everything was normal at dinner, of carrying the burden alone, and Laura's heart ached as she listened, realizing that the quiet suffering Ethan endured was invisible to David, ignored in favor of convenience, and that the damage of deceit was never just emotional, but it spread like ripples through the family, touching everyone who lived under the same roof. She asked him to tell her everything he had seen, every small detail he felt safe sharing, and as he described awkward meetings, lingering looks, and moments that made him uncomfortable, Laura kept her voice calm, never raising it, letting him speak freely, letting the weight be lifted from his chest without judgment. Ethan's eyes, usually bright and lively, now held a shadow of adult concern, and Laura realized that children sometimes see more than adults think, sometimes feel more than we give them credit for, and his bravery, even in a fragile, frightened way, gave her both sorrow and a strange sense of strength, because acknowledging the truth is always the first step toward healing. As the evening stretched on, Ethan grew quieter, exhausted from carrying the secret and finally sharing it, and Laura wrapped him in a gentle embrace, reminding him that he had done the right thing, that she loved him, and that the burden was never meant for him alone to bear. Sitting there in the dimly lit kitchen, the smell of soup lingering in the air, Laura's mind raced through memories, questions, and fears, thinking of the conversations she might have with David, the decisions she would have to make, the protection she owed Ethan, and she realized that the fragility of trust had never been clearer, that love and honesty were intertwined in ways that could both heal and hurt, and that tonight marked the end of pretending that everything was fine. She stayed close to Ethan, letting him know she was present, that she understood his pain, that she would shield him from more hurt where she could, and as she watched him finally relax a little, releasing the tension he had carried for too long, she understood that truth, though painful, was a gift, a chance to rebuild, a chance to face what was broken and make choices that were right and fair, not only for her but for the boy who had grown up too quickly in a household where secrets overshadowed love. That night, as Ethan went to his room and Laura cleaned up the kitchen with shaking hands, she felt a mixture of grief and clarity, knowing that the quiet moments, the whispered confessions, and the courage of a teenager had changed the course of her life, and that moving forward would require strength, honesty, and a willingness to face heartbreak with dignity, to protect those she loved while also confronting truths that could no longer be ignored. And as she sat at the table for a moment, staring out at the calm street, she promised herself that she would do whatever it took to create a space of honesty and safety for Ethan, to ensure he never had to carry a secret that heavy alone again, and that the first step toward healing the fractured trust in their home had already begun with his brave words when Laura finally confronted David. The truth that Ethan had revealed hung between them like a heavy fog, and she noticed immediately that he did not try to deny it. Instead, he paced the living room, hands running through his hair, voice strained as he muttered that it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, that he hadn't meant for it to happen, and Laura, standing firm yet calm, listened without interrupting, letting him talk, knowing that the real impact was not just in his words but in the way they had betrayed the life they had built together. The tension in the house was almost physical, pressing on every surface, making her chest tight, and she realized that David's casual explanation, meant perhaps to soothe himself, only highlighted the magnitude of his carelessness, the distance he had allowed to grow between them, and the way he had ignored the emotional needs of both her and Ethan. Laura's mind raced as she thought about the months of subtle signs, the late nights, the guarded phone, the hurried excuses, the quiet dinners where smiles felt forced, and she understood that this confrontation was not only about infidelity but about accountability, about facing what had been hidden for too long, about making choices that could no longer be postponed. She spoke slowly, carefully, telling David that the betrayal he had committed was not just a breach of their marriage, but also a wound to Ethan, a child who had watched and felt the tension, who had carried a burden no teenager should ever bear, and she saw shame cross David's face for the first time, the weight of reality pressing down, showing that even those who avoid truth cannot escape its eventual reckoning. Ethan, meanwhile, withdrew further into himself, spending long hours in his room, headphones on, trying to shut out the chaos, and Laura made it her mission to be the bridge for him, to reassure him that his voice mattered, that he had done nothing wrong, and that he could trust her to stand with him even as the foundation of their family shifted beneath them. The dinners became quieter, the house heavier, yet there were moments of fragile connection, small talks about school and friends, glimpses of the boy she knew beneath the stress and heartache, and in these moments Laura realized that love was more than romantic gestures, it was protection, it was guidance, it was choosing honesty over comfort even when it hurt everyone involved. She began to understand that staying in a marriage broken by deceit would not heal anyone, that pretending could only prolong pain, and that courage sometimes meant stepping away, showing both herself and Ethan what it meant to value integrity, dignity, and emotional well-being over appearances. One evening, as she packed a small suitcase quietly in her bedroom, Ethan appeared in the doorway, uncertainty and sadness in his eyes, asking if she was leaving because of him, and Laura shook her head, hugging him tightly, explaining that she was leaving because she needed to honor herself, because she wanted him to see how truth and courage could guide decisions, because she wanted to model strength instead of fear. Tears fell freely as Ethan nodded, understanding in his own quiet way that change, though painful, could bring freedom, that honesty could be a lifeline rather than a punishment, and that sometimes the bravest acts were about leaving what was familiar to create a better, safer future. That night, as Laura drove away from the house that had held so many memories, she felt a mix of grief, relief, and uncertainty. Knowing that nothing would ever be the same, that rebuilding trust in life required patience and strength, that Ethan's words had opened a door to reality she could no longer ignore, and that the journey ahead, though unknown, held the promise of emotional clarity, honesty, and a chance to heal the wounds that had festered in silence for too long. And as she glanced in the rearview mirror at the fading lights of the neighborhood, she made a quiet vow to herself and to Ethan that they would face the future together with integrity, compassion, and courage, no matter how hard the path might be. Months passed since Laura had left the Miller house, and life had settled into a quieter, simpler rhythm, far from the tension and heartbreak she had left behind. As she moved into a small apartment near Lake Erie, where the mornings smelled of fresh coffee and the evenings were calm, giving her space to breathe, to think, and to rebuild not just her life but her sense of self, while Ethan began visiting regularly, each visit bringing laughter, conversation, and the slow, steady work of repairing the emotional distance that had formed during the months of secrecy and betrayal. And Laura watched him grow stronger, lighter, more like the boy she had always known beneath the weight he had carried, realizing that truth had been a liberating force for both of them, allowing them to face the pain honestly and find moments of peace together. Their talks became deeper, covering everything from school and friendships to trust and feelings, and Laura shared with him what she had learned about setting boundaries, valuing honesty, and choosing courage over fear, while Ethan opened up about his own struggles, his disappointment in his father, and the relief he felt in being able to speak freely without fear of judgment. And these moments, tender and sincere, helped them rebuild not just a relationship but a sense of family rooted in understanding rather than pretense. One sunny afternoon, they walked through a park near the lake, the crisp winter air lifting their spirits, and Ethan looked at her with a quiet smile, saying, "I'm glad you didn't pretend anymore." And Laura felt a warmth she hadn't realized she had missed, the acknowledgement of her choice to act with integrity giving her a sense of peace that no argument or betrayal could take away. She explained to him that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about facing it, learning from it, and making choices that reflected who they truly wanted to be. And Ethan listened carefully, nodding, understanding in his heart the power of honesty, courage, and self-respect, and the lessons of love that went beyond romance, that showed him that emotional safety and dignity mattered more than appearances or convenience. Laura reflected on her journey from the tense kitchen conversations, the confrontations with David, and the nights filled with doubt and sorrow, realizing that infidelity had ended her marriage but not her capacity to hope, to love, or to connect meaningfully with those who mattered, and that protecting Ethan, supporting him, and modeling strength had become her true purpose, teaching them both that courage sometimes came in small, quiet acts rather than grand gestures, she also understood that love, in its healthiest form, required honesty, vulnerability, and respect, and that a relationship built on lies could never provide the safety and connection that both she and Ethan deserved, and by choosing to step away, she had given them the gift of clarity and the chance to rebuild their emotional lives on solid ground. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened, filled with shared memories, gentle conversations, and the comfort of knowing they had each other to rely on, and Laura felt a renewed sense of identity, no longer defined by betrayal or silence but by her strength, compassion, and ability to act with integrity even in the hardest moments. The sun set over Lake Erie one evening, casting golden light over the water, and as they sat on a bench together, watching the calm waves, Ethan turned to her, a sense of calm and trust in his eyes, and said, "I feel like we're finally okay," and Laura smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace, knowing that the pain they had endured had not been wasted, that honesty had healed wounds, and that their future, though uncertain, was built on truth, respect, and mutual care. She realized that the bravest and most romantic moments weren't about passion or drama, but about the quiet decisions to act with courage, to protect those you love, and to face life's difficulties with grace, and that by choosing this path, she and Ethan had found a kind of happiness rooted in reality, connection, and emotional resilience that no betrayal could erase. And as they left the park, walking side by side in the fading light, Laura felt a weight lift from her shoulders, understanding that peace and hope were not distant dreams but the reward of truth, honesty, and the courage to start over. And in that moment, she knew that love, pure, honest, and gentle, was possible again, and that the scars of the past had shaped them into stronger, wiser, and more compassionate people, ready to face whatever the future held with dignity, grace, and an open heart.